I want you to imagine this. You've been working for 30, 40 years. You built a great life. Everything is right on track. You've retired, life is great. And then one day we're gone. But instead of leaving peace, we leave a nightmare. Our family has to go into a courtroom, and this stranger with a gavel and a robe, they get to decide who gets what. And they don't know you, they don't know your values, they don't know your family, they don't know anything about your unique situation. That's probate. And probate is not just a little bit scary. It doesn't sometimes cause division or arguments, but it actually can also be pretty expensive. That numbers show that probate can take tens of thousands, not hundreds of thousands of dollars. That somewhere on average is about 5% of your wealth, of your estate. It goes into court costs and legal fees, but it doesn't have to be that way. We can set up right now a plan in place that ensures that your wishes, your values, and all of your stuff gets to the right people, ensuring that your family has fewer things to argue about and that the money is not tied up in court for years where they're arguing and things are going back and forth. So let's start with what probate is and why it's generally a good idea to avoid it if you can. So in the very simplest term, we can see that probate is the process of taking our stuff and retitling it. So the assets are frozen when we pass. And at that time, the court is going to try to figure out who is supposed to get the stuff. Did you want your mom to get the car? Did you want your sister to get the car? Did you want your brother to get the car? Who did you want to get the house? Who did you want to have all the stuff? When you look at probate, the couple of things to think of is one, it's a decently long time. There are some that go on for years. Now, I'm not saying all of our estates are going to take that long to get settled, but to know that it is something that can happen. And part of the reason it can happen is because what ends up happening is normally the court is going to say, hey, Dre is gone. Is there anyone that feels that they have a claim to his estate that would like to speak in court? And then the judge is going to give a certain amount of time for people to get the information so they can then come to court. And then whoever shows up is who shows up, and then they get their time in court. Well, that takes money. That judge gets paid a pretty high amount every single hour. In the filing and the paperwork and the lawyers and all the other stuff, that you can see while the legal fees do add up, that it could be anywhere from 3 to 7% of the value of someone's estate. And so this process can take months, if not years, of hearing people come up, contesting and saying that that's not the right will, or dad loved me, or I'm the long lost relative. All these nasty things that we end up reading about speaks on one of the other issues of probate. Probate is also a public disclosure, right? It is public record. We can look up and we can Google whatever someone's probate is if they don't have it set up in a way where the assets get passed along without it being a court public hearing. And if that's not enough, because a court is set up where people get to show up and argue their case, it can naturally lead to a lot of family conflicts. As naturally you can imagine, I believe that if everyone is showing up and fighting for certain assets, there's a couple of things that are going to happen. One is we all agree that it's exactly as one person said. You and I know that it doesn't even sound like that's probably what's going to happen. The other option is that we both disagree, and then the judge is going to try to split the baby in half, right? Like, or to try to figure out what makes everyone happy. You won't be all the way happy, but you'll be a little bit happy. And the third option is like, it can really cause our family to just break and splinter. That depending on how that hearing goes, depending on how that probate process goes, our family may not ever talk again, which is not something that we want. We don't want that to be the case. When we worked hard, we built the wealth, we try to pass on the values, but for some reason it's not translating because we are going through probate. And now it's just like dog eat dog, I win or you win. It feels like a zero-sum game. And we're trying to figure out, how do I get this judge to believe my case? And a lot of the times, just like in politicians, when you're trying to get elected, you don't always stay positive. It's not uncommon to start doing negative ads where you're like, you may not want to vote for me, but you really don't want to vote for them. And we see that more and more where there's not necessarily an argument of values and positions. It's an argument on who's the lesser of two evils, which is like obviously an issue within itself, but we don't want that type of political sportsmanship in a family probate court. But unfortunately, it ends up being that way a lot more times than not. I remember working with this family. The father, he had passed and he had done all the investing, he had done all the finances, and he had set everything up. And because of the process of going through probate, it took this family about 14 months just to be able to get keys to go into the house that their father had wanted them to live in. And during this time, you have to continue paying these fees because the money is frozen in probate. I don't have the access to the extra money to pay these costs. So I have to spend the money out of my own pocket, my own investments, or maybe even I have to sell some of these assets in the trust that I maybe would not have sold, but I need the money today just to get through this process. You can see how it can go from a great experience to a nightmare relatively quickly. When it comes to some of the things that people have a misunderstanding about, we're talking about the probate process. And one of the mistakes that people think is, well, if I have a will, my family can avoid probate, but that's actually not the case. If you have a will, it doesn't help you avoid probate. It sometimes can help you clearly get through probate. It can sometimes make sure your wishes are taken care of in probate, but it is a judge who's going to look at that will, read it and see, is this exactly what the person is trying to accomplish? Yes or no. The other one is some people will say, well, what I'll do is I would just put my children joint on all the accounts. But if we are going to do that, then we normally would take the option of setting it up as a joint ownership with rights of survivorship. And all that means is if something happens to one of us, the other one gets the asset. Because sometimes if we own things jointly, for example, like a business where we each own 50%, if it's not with rights of survivorship, then that other owner's 50% can go to their children. It can go to their heirs, whoever they choose to. But if we set it up with rights of survivorship, then whatever is left goes to the other owner. And so we can set up our accounts in a lot of ways with this. You just talk to your estate attorney. And what you're able to do is you could co-own bank accounts, you can co-own property and other assets. It is worth mentioning, as we mentioned earlier, this isn't ideal for every relationship. And so you do want to take a step back and look at the tax consequences of such an event. And all we're basically saying is you're not able to just have $1 million in an account and then just add your kid to it. And the government's like, oh, for sure, you were a part of this $1 million in the account. In many ways, the government is like, I believe you're just gifting this to them and you're trying to put one over on us. So depending on that person's relationship and how much was in the account when you added them versus how much they contributed into the account, there are times that it creates a taxable event and the government is going to consider it a gift. It is a case-by-case basis with joint ownership with rights of survivorship. And while that may end up saving us the process of going to probate, where this is already in your name, so you get the access to the money, it can cause gift tax issues. It can cause disinheritance where other children don't have access to those funds. If we just said, hey, this one child is going to be able to split it all out, it can cause a risk of lawsuit where there's multiple owners on the one account and where someone in the probate will say, well, it was a joint account. It was in both of their names. So that means I still have access as a creditor to those funds. Now, we're kind of getting in the weeds, so we're not going to go too deep in the weeds in this discussion. But what we are saying is the idea of just adding my child to the account and then now I don't have to worry about probate, it opens up other problems. And I would describe it almost like a movie where you watch certain movies and someone becomes, so we watch The Incredibles, right, where it's like, oh, they're superheroes. Well, okay, what would be a problem of being a superhero? And it's like, well, people don't want to be saved or people aren't grateful and they're suing you because you sort of destroyed some stuff and, collateral damage and things like that. And you can work through that. And that's basically all movie writing is without me going into storytelling, because I do enjoy storytelling so much. But right, the idea is, what is the worst thing that can happen based off of this current scenario? And then you write the story from there. And then you're like, okay, what's the new worst thing that can happen based on this scenario? And you write sequels that way to movies. And you can just do a lot of writing in that process. Well, that's sort of the way that this is. It's like, okay, well, I solved the first problem. So now I don't have to worry about my child having to go to probate. But we created 3 new problems that we may want to find a more efficient manner as far as transferring our assets without creating these additional issues. Instead of creating 3 new problems, what else could you do? Let's look at some wise alternatives. In addition to using a trust, you might also consider changing the beneficiaries. So there are certain accounts that you get to have a beneficiary on. Your life insurance is one you have a beneficiary. If you don't want to place it in the trust, like for example, if you know it's going to go to a particular person, if you're not concerned about how they're going to use it or any overall fears of them, with creditors and different things, then you could just write that person as the beneficiary, where you can avoid the trust altogether. You could also do that with things like your 401k and your other retirement accounts. You know that that is often an option where they ask you, hey, who's the beneficiary that you would like on the account? Now, if you want to have a little bit more control when you pass it on, then moving it inside of a trust gives you that control. You can stipulate what has to happen for them to receive the money. If it's just in their name, then the day that we leave is the day that they receive the check. Obviously, there's a little bit of processing time. They have to show the death certificate, things like that, but you get the idea. They just get the money, all of it, no strings attached. If you want to leave a little bit of control in these retirement accounts like your IRA, your 401k, or 403b, then you may want to name the trust as the beneficiary. Also, you consider doing something called a ladybird deed. Now, this is not something that's across every state. You have to look to see which one. I'm in the good old state of Florida. Florida has ladybird laws. The way the ladybird deed works is you're able to name the beneficiary where it avoids probate, but you don't have to sell the asset. You can maintain control of the asset. It's yours. You can live in it. You can mortgage it. You can do all these different things that you would like to do to it. It is sort of a revocable trust in another sense because you're able to change these beneficiaries and change around the way you'd like it designed. But if you are interested in a ladybird, all it is simply saying, when I pass, they get this, and it does not have to go to probate. And that's the goal, avoiding the probate costs, avoiding the length of time in probate, and avoiding the fact that it becomes public record and we got to go through all this stuff with our family and the arguing. You may also consider just passing the assets while we're still alive. I'm a big fan of if the retirement plan is set, because for me, retirement planning is the first step of generational wealth. But if your retirement plan is set, then we can start donating and gifting things while we're still alive. Every single year, the government comes out with a number. I believe it's $18,000 in 2025, and you're able to gift that amount to an individual. $36,000 if you're a couple, you can gift it to an individual, and you don't have to worry about probate and all these other things. You can just gift it while you're alive. Now, these can create tax events depending on how much you give, but there are ways to avoid that. And I believe I have a video I'll link for you where it goes through a handful of gifting strategies where you don't have to worry about paying any gift tax. Now, if your goal is to pay for their college, for example, you can pay it directly to the university, and that does not count as a taxable gift. You can also do that with medical expenses. You pay it directly to the hospital, and again, that does not count as a taxable gift. There are other ways that we could do it with like a 529 plan if you want to pay for their college. And then you're able to front load that with 5 years. So that would be 18,000 times 5. You're able to front load that as an individual, and then 18,000 times 10. If each of you are giving 5 years front loaded, then you can give $180,000 ahead of time where it's not an expense that is outside of the gift tax. Now, all of these options can work in your own unique situation, but if you want the most control and clarity, that's where setting up your own trust comes in. Which is why for most people, they end up saying, oh, I know I'm going to do. I'm going to set up a trust. We've heard about a trust. We know that trusts end up being a way that we can pass these assets on without it going through probate, and that is true. But it's not about just setting up a trust because Michael Jackson set up a trust. It's about funding the trust, and he did not fund the trust. So the assets did not go in the trust. And it's also the way that we design the trust. How are the rules and the values and the things that we set up? In fact, if this is something that you ultimately decide you want to do, I do have a free resource available for you. It's at happilyretired.com. I'll put a link in the show notes for you. And that is why I created something called the Trust and Legacy Blueprint, because there are 10 critical mistakes that I see families make all the time that cause their assets to be dragged into probate, even when they thought that they were protected from it. And when it comes to designing a trust, normally what happens is your estate attorney and your financial planner, they work together on the designing of the trust, where we're going to have the legal documents, that is the legal side. But as far as the plan and the design, normally that's on the financial planner side. And there's normally 3 steps that you want to be able to do when it comes to making your trust. And so the first one is you decide the legal structure of your trust. So you normally have 2 choices on the very simplest level where you want it to be revocable, which means I can change out the assets inside of it. I can revoke rights, right? And irrevocable, which means that once it goes in there, it's kind of in there. And so your HOA would be in irrevocable. Once the money goes in your HOA, you're not really getting it back. But they have rules and bylaws of how they can spend the money. They can't go buy themselves a Porsche or Lamborghini, but they can spend the money on getting the clubhouse painted or adding a new pool or a new fence or getting the grass mowed and things like that, because there's rules on how they can spend the money. When it comes to your trust, you have the ability to sort of do the same thing. When the money is inside the trust or the assets are inside the trust, I can decide how my kids spend those assets. Can they spend it on college or a home or a business? Can they spend it on dates? Can they spend it on healthcare? How are they able to spend the money? What do they have to do to get the money? And you can write all these rules and bylaws in your trust design. Now, if you're someone that's thinking more like a living trust, well, that is a revocable trust. So revocable means, as we said, I can put the money inside and outside of the trust. However I decide. If I want to write it in the trust name this year, I can. If I want to write it into the trust name this year, I can. If I want to write it back into my name next year, I can. It's revocable. Now, the big difference is from a tax perspective. If it's revocable, normally it's still counted as your estate because you literally could write it back in your name the next day. If it's irrevocable, then you have given up ownership. Someone else has control of that. And because of that, is normally not considered in your estate. So it's not taxed in your estate. And so that is just something else that we normally want to be thinking about. It is also important to note that your revocable trust, once you pass, becomes an irrevocable trust. It means that they can't change it. The second step is we normally want to fund the trust. And when I talk about funding the trust, I'm talking about changing the beneficiaries, where instead of it being my children, it would be the trust. So it would be like Greg's family trust. That would have to become the beneficiary for the trust to get funded. If we're talking about real estate or a business and it's currently in my name, I'm going to sell the business to the trust. And then the trust is going to be the new owner of the business. So anytime a check is written, it's going to be written from the trust. Anytime a bill is paid, it's going to be sent to the trust, and then the trust is going to pay that bill. The trust is its own legal entity. Think of it like a business, right? If you had a business, could you write a check in a business name? Of course you can. Can you open a bank account in your business name? Of course you can. Can you buy a car in your business name? Of course you can. Can you have patents in your business name? Yes. Can you own property? Of course. So you can see that basically your trust is almost like a business in some sense, and then you start writing things in your business name. That is where a lot of people mess up. They'll go to sunbiz.org, right? Because I'm in Florida. So they go to sunbiz.org, they'll pay the $150, have a business name, and then they'll leave all the money in their bank account. Well, is the business bank account funded now? Well, no. The business exists, the bank account exists, but there's no money in the account. That's what a lot of people do with their trust. They go and create it. It does exist as a legal entity, but you got to put the money inside of it. And so that's normally going to be retitling any of those properties, any of the business, renaming things and adding the beneficiaries to where it's the trust instead of whatever the beneficiaries used to be. That's what we call funding the trust. And then step 3, there's normally going to be a handful of things that we fund the trust with. It could be real estate where you retitle a property in the name of your trust. It could be your retirement accounts where you write the beneficiary of your 401k instead of it being a family member, it's the trust. It could be a business interest where you have 50% of a business. Instead, it's not your 50%, it's the trust 50%. You can do it with your bank accounts and your investment accounts where your cash and your investment and different other assets that you have, those are all going to be rewritten into the name of the trust, or at least the beneficiary is going to be the trust where it immediately receives those assets. And then for some, it could be your life insurance policies where the beneficiary of that would be the trust instead of whoever you originally had. And they also could do different other properties. It could be digital properties, we're talking about like patents and different things. All those could be written into the name of the trust, and then you're funding your trust with these assets. From there, that means that now there is no reason to freeze these assets and then to go to a probate judge where they make that decision. These assets will just move on to the person because whoever you have running the trust, that person is going to just call those people up and say, hey, Dre had a trust design, Griggs Family Trust, and he said that you get his car. Would you like to pick up the keys someday next week? I'm available this time and this time. Because the trust has the right to rewrite that car into the name of that beneficiary. And then that is not going in front of a judge. And because it's not going in front of a judge, it's not public information. And because no one has to make their case, then we have less family arguing because they recognize, well, it's just done. Like the person called me up, told me what I get. There's not really much else to talk about. I don't really need to go to war with my family to get something. It's not about me persuading someone. It's already written that way. And we already taken care of everything. Now, it's probably worth mentioning that it's important to have regular updates of your trust. This is not a set it and forget it type of a thing. In many ways, it's because your assets are changing. If you sell your house and move, well, we need to figure out whether the new house needs to go in the trust or not. If you sell your business and receive cash, if you buy another business, if you increase or decrease the ownership of your business, as life changes, we should go back and review our trust. You could even talk about it from the perspective of the children that are named inside of it. or the rules in our grandchildren. And there's so many things that are constantly happening. All these major life events should cause us to at least take a quick look at our trust. And for some people, it's just once a year we take a look at the trust. We see how everything is going, whether it still makes sense or not. But for others, it's just whether we have those major life events. If there's not a lot happening, I will remember whenever a major life event happens, someone passes, someone's born, someone moves, someone sells, I'm going to go back and review the trust to make sure it still makes sense. I know we talked about a lot of the nuts and the bolts, and we've gone into detail from the numbers and the tactics of things, but I would be remiss if I didn't actually mention that it's important to remember our values, our voice, and our vision for our family and our future. And that's why I do think a part of setting up a proper estate does require us to have a legacy letter. I like the idea of having a letter that our family can read, that can be read to them, that maybe you can have a hologram from ChatGPT read it to them in your voice. I don't know how you'd want to do it, but I do think it's important to pass on that vision because the story should be a part of it. That you don't want to have trust fund babies where they don't have the vision. And we know that the numbers show that generational wealth is 90% gone by the third generation, like 70% gone by the second generation. And a lot of the time it's because we passed on the wealth, but we didn't pass on anything else. And it's like the simple idea of teaching people how to fish versus giving them fish. We give all of our kids a bunch of fish, great, they're going to eat for a while. But eventually those fish are going to run out, especially when the fisherman stops picking up the fish, right? And that's what will happen when we pass. And the numbers will sometimes show things like, well, the third generation curse is the first generation became the person to generate the wealth. Right? They gained the wisdom, they gained the understanding, they gained all that stuff. The second generation didn't have a clear understanding, but they knew it was super valuable. And so they didn't want to mess it up. And so they kind of held it like a very precious glass and like, oh, I don't want to mess it up. And then when it passed to the third generation, they didn't know the grind. They didn't know the struggle. They didn't know the growth. And so they ended up wasting it, more or less. And you see that in a variety of arenas where people who win the lottery, it says the majority of them are broke within 3 years. Talk about professional athletes, the majority of them are broke within 3 years of retirement. And you start looking at these numbers and it's like, well, what is it that they're missing? And they're missing the wisdom. They're missing the values and the voice and the vision because all they know is how to maintain a lifestyle that they had. And so whether they made $50,000 a year or $100,000 a year or $200,000 a year, whatever it is, they didn't know how to generate millions a year. And so when you pass millions on to someone, all they know how to do is create the life that they've already created, which is the $50,000 a year life. And so it reverts back to that. And then that's what we see happening in a variety of arenas. And so when you're talking about passing on the story and the vision, inside of the Trust and Legacy Blueprint, I actually show you how to create a legacy letter. And I will actually share mine. So I'll put mine on the screen. Probably won't read the whole thing, but it's the current one that I have with them. Like if I pass today, this is what would be read to them. And so it's like, Griggs family, I have lived my life guided by a few core lessons. One is that freedom always comes with a cost, and you must be willing to pay it. True freedom is built by protecting your core values while increasing your economic worth through wisdom. Wisdom to me is simply finding solutions that work for others in our world and adopting them so they work for you too. One of my favorite African proverbs says, wealth which enslaves the owner isn't wealth. Never sacrifice your long-term freedom for short-term pleasures. Things that seem like freedom in the moment, a luxury car, an extravagant trip, or anything purchased with debt, can become chains that bind you later. Protect your freedom, spend wisely, never trade lasting security for a temporary feeling of abundance. Put your money to work by building multiple streams of income so you don't have to work for money. Do not allow yourself to live permanently as a slave to the system. I hope for you what I've always hoped for myself, that you'll be able to work for purpose and satisfaction, not for money. I want to help you purchase your freedom and hope you will guard and maintain it so you can spend your time on things that bring you joy and meaning. Another value I hold close is that doing your best is never a burden. Doing your best is its own reward. When you give your all, it doesn't matter if you win or lose because you will stand proud knowing you did all that you could. This way of thinking helps you measure yourself by your effort and integrity, not the outcomes that are sometimes beyond your control. I also hope you keep our family traditions alive, continue gathering for game night, and do your best to keep Yes Week alive. Carry forward the belief that we should always leave the world better than we found it, and remember most of the world is unhappy and bitter, so you doing something that the world disagrees with isn't the worst thing that can happen. When challenges come, and they will come, keep this in mind. In every good time, there is someone experiencing the worst day of their life, and in every bad time, someone is having the best day. Economically, it's like a recession. Even the downturns, some companies achieve record growth, and in times of prosperity, some go bankrupt. Life events don't define you. What matters is how you choose to respond to them. I believe we are strong enough to overcome the world, which is a quote from John 16:33. And so ultimately it comes down to the idea of making sure that you don't just pass on the stuff to your family, but they understand why you passed it on. What was it that you were trying to achieve for them? How were you trying to set them up in the future? It wasn't that you just wanted them to be able to buy a car for the sake of buying a car. It wasn't even that you just didn't want them to have to think about money, because that is nice and we do have that feeling and that desire. But it's like, what does it allow you to accomplish, and how do you want your family to remember you? Now, if you're someone that's interested in taking the first step, just kind of want to set things up for you, I did put together a trust and legacy blueprint, and it walks you through the 10 most costly mistakes that send people to probate and shows you how to fix them step by step. It's at happilyretired.com. I'll put a link in the show notes for you. Plus, you'll get my personal legacy letter template so that you can create your own legacy letter and pass your own values on as well. As always, I'm thankful for the time that we have together. Until next time, stay safe and enjoy life.